The wind sweeping across the plains of Marathon lashes against the imaginary lens like the rough hand of history itself, dragging the viewer back to 490 BC, where the shores of Attica groaned beneath the footsteps of an empire expanding like a shadow swallowing the eastern Mediterranean. On the decks of the Persian ships, hundreds of white sails, sharp and predatory like the teeth of some great hunting beast, billowed in the Aegean wind, carrying with them the ambition of Darius the Great to crush the fledgling Athenian democracy and turn Greece into a subservient province. The sky was a steel-bright blue, and the restless water mirrored the tens of thousands of Persian warriors, silent, yet heavy with the pressure of an approaching storm. Across the way, the Greek mainland was more than sand, stone, and olive trees. It was a place where freedom was treated like the first breath of life. Athens trembled ever so slightly, like a whisper brushing the viewer's ear. War was coming, not as a distant shadow, but as a flame set right at the doorstep, where every citizen understood that if they lost, it would not only be the fall of a city, but the extinguishing of a human idea, the right to choose one's own destiny. Dawn frost clung to bronze spears, glimmering thinly like a warning. Barefoot messengers sprinted across blazing stone, carrying dire news from polis to polis, and time was no longer measured in days but in heartbeats. Behind the crash of waves, one could almost hear history tightening, like a bowstring drawn to its absolute limit, needing only a single release for the arrow to fly, and for Marathon to become the place where two worlds collided, creating an explosion not of gunpowder but of human will. Before the shores of Marathon became the fault line where two opposing civilizations collided, the story had already been written deep within the heart of Asia, where the Persian Empire swelled like a burning wind sweeping across the steppes, gathering territories one by one into the jeweled crown of Darius. By the late 6th century BC, Persia controlled everything from India to Asia Minor, a span of power never before seen. Yet in the far west, there remained a small pocket of freedom: Greece. City-states such as Athens, Sparta, Plataea, and Eretria were not centralized empires, but a mosaic of clashing ambitions, rivalries, and pride. Among them, Athens flickered as the first spark of democracy, small yet dazzling, like staring straight into the sun. And it was precisely that spark that made Persia see danger. If the idea of freedom spread, the conquered territories of Asia Minor could ignite like fields of dry grass touched by embers. The fuse was lit when the Ionian Revolt broke out in 499 BC, where Athens sent ships and soldiers across the sea to aid the Greek cities in Asia Minor, burning Sardis to the ground. A stinging blow to the pride of King Darius. In that moment, history drew a red cross over the name Athens. From that point on, retribution was inevitable. Darius did not merely want to silence Athens. He wanted to carve them into stone as a warning, so every Greek people would know that resisting Persia meant erasure from the map. In Persepolis, beneath columns rising like a forest of stone, the command was given: a sea-borne campaign aimed straight at Attica. Persia had already conquered Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. Athens, for all its intellect and spirit, was a lone vessel adrift on a vast ocean. As the Persian forces advanced toward the Aegean, each war drum beat like the heartbeat of history, steady yet relentless, signaling the unavoidable confrontation ahead. Eretria, Athens' ally, was struck first. The siege dragged on, factions tore the city apart, gates opened, and Eretria fell. It was a warning held up like a spear before Athens. Stand tall, and your fate will be no different. Athens responded with the only weapon it possessed: unity forged in the ecclesia, the assembly of its citizens. No absolute king, no decree from a throne, only collective decision. The closer the danger drew, the more their voices aligned. They sent the runner Phidippides on a 2-day sprint to Sparta for aid, his feet bleeding on the Peloponnesian stones, his breath hot as a tongue of flame, carrying a plea not just for a city but for a way of life. But Sparta was bound by the Carneia festival, a sacred period forbidding military departure, so help would come late. Athens understood. They were nearly alone. Only tiny Plataea stood beside them, sending roughly 1,000 hoplites, modest in number, yet like an extra spear planted beside Athens' shield, turning solitude into alliance. Their resolve gleamed as bright and solid as bronze armor under the Marathon sun. Meanwhile, the Persian fleet curved southward past Euboea, like a talon raking the shoreline. They did not strike Athens' walls immediately, but chose Marathon, a broad plain ideal for deploying cavalry, where the soft earth under Persian hooves could tear open the hoplite ranks if Athens miscalculated. Persian sails appeared off Marathon in the summer of 490 BC. Thousands of spear points and archers from the Medes, Persians, and Saka stretching like an unbroken line of sand. The air itself felt compressed, each breath for the people of Attica heavy as if bearing stone on their chests. Athens marched to Marathon under the command of Miltiades, a man who understood Persia was not merely an army but a monstrous engine of conquest. He knew that waiting for Sparta risked allowing Persia to strike Athens directly by sea, trapping the city in a pincer. His decision was bold. Take the army to the plain and face Persia immediately, like a small blade daring to meet a giant spear, hoping speed and resolve could tilt the balance. In the days before the battle, tensions settled layer upon layer like sediment. The Athenians camped on the hills overlooking Marathon, watching the Persian encampment below stretch across the moonlit shore like a dark scar. Each night, the campfires of both sides glowed like twin red constellations staring each other down, quiet yet heavy as thunder waiting to break. Every Athenian soldier felt real fear. They were not professional imperial troops, but potters, farmers, ship captains, men who donned bronze armor simply because their city needed them. Yet within them lay something Persia could not carry across the sea. The belief that if they fell, they would be protecting the children not yet grown, protecting the right to speak, to choose, to decide. That spirit was like a taut rope stretched across an abyss, thin but unyielding. So long as it did not snap, even mountains would show respect. In the Persian camp, Generals Datis and Artaphernes believed victory was only a matter of time. They held numerical superiority, swift cavalry, archers who could rain arrows like storms. Greece's hoplites were powerful but slow. If encircled by Persian cavalry, their lines would erode like stone worn down by wind. Marathon was not a place to await salvation. It was the place where Athens willingly placed its fate on the scales. Days passed. Sparta did not arrive. Reinforcements were as distant as promises beyond reach. But history does not wait, just as the sun rises over the Aegean no matter the peril. When its light flashed across their bronze armor, the Athenians knew time was slipping away. Miltiades proposed a preemptive strike, attack before Persia completed its optimal formation, using the narrow flanks to negate Persian cavalry advantage. This was the moment when tension erupted not with the clash of swords, but with decision-making. The generals' council was divided. The night passed like a wavering balance between recklessness and restraint. But by dawn, as soldiers saw the sea's mist and Persian sails glinting like drawn daggers, their resolve hardened like forged steel. Marathon was no longer a stretch of sand. It had become the boundary between freedom and submission, between the future of Athens and the shadow of empire. And then history moved, quietly, subtly, like water pushed by a faint breeze, guiding events toward the moment when the Greek army began to shift, carrying with it years of accumulated tension as the conflict between self-governance and absolute power reached its point of ignition. No grand drums, no dramatic proclamations, only the first steps forward, like water forced through a narrow channel, leading into the next chapter, where formations, strategies, and the calculations drawn upon the sands of Marathon would decide whether a small city-state could stand against the mightiest empire of its age. Dawn over Marathon flashed like a blade drawn from its sheath. The sun had not yet fully risen, but its red light spilled across the sea, illuminating the two forces facing each other, not as shifting silhouettes, but as stark reality. The Persians had landed with an estimated 25,000 infantry and archers, supported by elite cavalry. the strategic weapon that had crushed every army that dared resist them. They formed their line across the width of the sandy plain. A dense center of archers, cavalry waiting behind for the moment to sweep the flanks, and light infantry on both wings, loose and fluid like waves. Seen from above, the Persian formation resembled an open gate, one that, once approached, would unleash a storm of arrows like a stone quarry shattered by a divine hammer. Opposite them, Athens had only about 9,000 hoplites, heavy armor, round shields, long spears, neither numerous nor fast, but standing like stone pillars bound together by an oath to defend their city-state. Plataea contributed another 1,000 hoplites, bringing the total to roughly 10,000, less than half the Persian force. Among them, there was no cavalry, only infantry packed shoulder to shoulder, ranks tight as bricks in a fortress wall. Miltiades arranged the Greek formation with a thin center and reinforced wings, a choice that seemed counterintuitive, yet it was a psychological gambit designed to lure the Persian center forward, like a blade tip pulled off balance by its own thrust. The Marathon plain was broad and flat, but behind the Greeks lay hills and forest, terrain that prevented Persian cavalry from sweeping behind them. Miltiades saw here an invisible advantage: force the enemy inward, narrow their approach, and the Athenian wings could close like the jaws of a vice, crushing the Persian center into a trapped core. This was more than battlefield geometry. It was a wager of destiny. If the Greek center collapsed, no thickness of wings could prevent the entire line from shattering. In the air, every Greek soldier could almost hear the wind whistling across Persian bowstrings, like a long breath waiting to release. They knew they could not wait much longer. Spartan reinforcements remained in the Peloponnese, and the plain still offered space for Persian horses to surge forward at any moment. Miltiades gave the order to prepare for attack, not to wait for Persia to advance, but to run straight at them. It was an unprecedented decision. Heavily armored hoplites normally advanced slowly to maintain formation, but this time Athens chose speed, the only way to close the distance before the arrows tore their ranks apart. Soldiers tightened their sandals, adjusted their shield straps, bronze helmets brightening under the rising sun. They breathed in the damp earth, the salt of the sea, the sweat of comrades beside them, each breath a renewed vow that they would not retreat. From a narrow viewpoint behind the shield line, like a camera pressed close, you could see the strategies of both sides unfolding like a layered war map. Persia wanted to draw the Greeks into range. Mayday archers pulled back long composite bows of horn and sinew, capable of shooting farther than Greek bows. The arrows did not need to kill immediately. They only needed to disrupt the hoplite formation, forcing gaps. And once the shields faltered, cavalry would surge like a black wind, ripping the edges of the Greek line the way wolves tear the throat of a goat. But Miltiades wanted the opposite: thick wings, a deliberately thin center, a baited line pulling the Persians into a false moment of superiority. It was a hunter's trap, stepping back just enough so both hands could snap shut when the prey lunged. The hoplites began their charge, not as fast as Persian light infantry, but heavy, steady, each pounding step landing like a blow on the viewer's chest. The initial distance was more than a kilometer. When they closed to 400 meters, the arrows began to fly. There is no need to exaggerate their sound. History itself is brutal enough. Arrow storms had shattered many Greek forces before, but that day, the hoplites pressed on, shields lifted like moving rooftops against the falling darts. Arrows clattered off bronze, dropped into the sand, but the formation did not waver, did not split. The closer they ran, the narrower the danger became, until arrows were no longer terror, but only a fading noise behind the rising clash of armor. Across the field, the Persians witnessed something they had never seen: a small army charging without breaking, without retreating. The Persian center, numerous and confident, pushed forward to swallow the Athenian advance. When the two lines met, it was like two slabs of stone smashing together. The Greek center was driven back, exactly what Miltiades intended. On both flanks, where the hoplites were thickest and strongest, The Athenians halted the Persian wings and began to press inward. The formation bent like a bow reversed under tension. The harder the Persians drove into the center, the more the Greek wings curved around them. Seen from above, the shape was almost mathematical. The center pulled inward, the wings arcing like spokes tightening around the invader's heart. The contrast between the two forces was stark as light and shadow. Persia, numerous, mobile, reliant on range and cavalry. Greece, few, heavy, dependent on discipline and close quarters pressure. Strategy was no longer theory but motion, arrows thinning, shields locking, spears lowering. There were no triumphant shouts, only the taut hush of a lyre string stretched to breaking. Because if either side faltered for even a heartbeat, the flow of battle would snap like dry wood. Marathon was nearing its breaking point, no longer hypothesis but reality, where every step, every gap, every spear point was writing the next line of a story whose earlier chapters had only gathered tension. And from here, the moment of full collision would burst open like a door kicked wide, leading us into the next section, where the battle would cease to be a plan and become the blinding flash of history unleashed upon the sands of Marathon. The moment the two formations slammed into each other, Marathon was no longer a plain but a blazing forge where two red-hot masses of will collided. The ground resounded with the relentless crash of bronze on bronze, each impact deep and heavy, like thunder compressed inside a narrow space. The Greek hoplites lowered their spears, shields locked into a long curved wall across the sand, advancing inch by inch like water forced through a stone crevice. At the center, the Persian infantry surged hard at the start. They were more numerous, lighter, and more agile. Their linen armor and wicker shields gave them the speed to strike repeatedly, each wave of blows pounding against the Athenian line like short, steady breakers. The Greek center was pushed back, not in chaos, but under clear pressure. Every step ceded feeding Persia's hope that the line would split and open a path for cavalry to flood the rear. But that retreat was not defeat. It was the channel Miltiades had carved deliberately into his strategy. As the thin Athenian center gave ground, Persia pushed deeper, like a flood rushing into a basin without noticing its walls. On both flanks, where the strongest hoplites were positioned, the Greek wings began to close. They did not charge recklessly, but angled inward, step by step pressing toward the Persian sides. Persia, flushed with the illusion of early victory, had not yet realized the iron ring tightening around them. Only when the left wing drove forward in a rolling wave and the right wing halted the Persian advance before folding inward did the balance begin to turn. Seen from above, the Persian line, once bulging forward, was now being squeezed into a reversed curve, like a piece of metal struck between three hammers. The Greek center stood on the razor's edge between breaking and rebounding. They had retreated as far as they could. Behind them lay their comrades, the soil of Attica, the city of Athens itself. And in that hair-thin moment before collapse, their resolve flared like a ray piercing thick clouds. They shifted their weight forward, shields braced under their chins, spears thrusting outward as they hurled the force of their entire bodies against the Persians. It was not a shout of triumph, but the exhalation of a people who refused to let their final backward step become a fracture. The line that had begun to loosen pulled tight again, like fabric drawn taut transforming into cord. Meanwhile, the Athenian wings had nearly completed their arc. Now they pressed in fully. The Persian infantry was compressed into the center of the plain, with no space to widen formation, no room for archers to fall back, and no open ground for cavalry to maneuver. What once was their strength, their vast numbers, became a burden, bodies crowding into a shrinking space, slowing movement and preventing the dispersal they relied upon. The rhythm of battle accelerated, not because of any dramatic sound, but because direct pressure could no longer slow. The hoplites moved with the unified pulse of shields and spears, a machine of 1,000 joints powered by breath and discipline. The Persians fought back, still numerous, still fierce, but Athens' tactical inversion had broken the momentum of their advance. Warriors from distant lands, Saka, Bactria, Babylon, Men who had fought in deserts, plains, great valleys, were now trapped in a ring they themselves had helped form by driving the Greek center backward. The space shrank. Arrows no longer had room for full draw. Cavalry's hooves were checked by tight terrain behind and closing walls ahead. An army that thrived on mobility now moved like water trapped inside a vessel. The battle did not turn in a single dramatic moment, but in breaths, half-steps of hoplites tightening the noose. The wind from the sea blew Persian banners backward, casting their shadows toward the shore, as if visually marking the reversal of the battlefield's tide. Miltiades did not need grand commands. The hoplite structure functioned almost as its own organism once cohesion held. The only objective was to press and press and press until the enemy had no space left to retreat. And when the Greek wings finally met behind the Persian formation, the encirclement locked shut like a city gate dropping into place. The flat front became a circular battlefield, pressure coming from all sides. Persian regiments broke into fragments, each cluster forced toward the sea where their ships lay anchored. Many Persian soldiers tried to flee to the ships. Historical accounts record around 6,400 Persian dead, not from a single explosive moment, but from the collapse of their center and the disorder that followed. Greek losses numbered around 192 hoplites, a far smaller figure, but every one was a citizen, a voice in the assembly, and no such loss was small to Athens. On the sand, the Athenians drove the Persians toward the water. Ships hastily launched, sails swelling in the wind like pale shapes retreating from the field. There is no need to embellish the chaos. History itself tells that Persian troops fled to the tide, many dying in the scramble to reach retreating vessels. And in that instant, Marathon reached its pinnacle, not through the sound of clashing swords, but through the total reversal of the fight. Athens, outnumbered, not only held the line, they repelled an empire. This was not legend, not cinematic exaggeration, but the product of strategy, discipline, and will bending the balance against all odds. As the last ships pulled away, the Marathon plain lay changed, reshaped like metal after forging, altering its form, its fate, and the future of a young idea called freedom. The battlefield quieted, but the heat of the moment still smoldered like embers in a forge not yet extinguished. Marathon did not end here. This defeat was not enough for Persia to forget Athens, and this victory could not make Greece complacent. The salt in the air, the footprints, the shattered bronze fittings scattered across the sand remained, but stronger still was the question ahead. Persia would return. How would Athens prepare? And how would a newborn democracy face the coming century of conflict? Marathon was only the first spark in a long chain of war, and the next chapter would bring us to the consequences, the outcomes, and the legacy this battle carved into both Greek history and the story of humankind. As the clash of metal at Marathon slowly faded, the outcome of the battle emerged as clearly as the afternoon sea in windless calm. Athens had won an overwhelming victory, and Persia, mighty, confident, and vastly superior in numbers, was forced to withdraw. The dark, heavy ships drifted away from the shore, carrying what remained of an army that had believed it would crush a small city-state with ease. More than 6,400 Persian soldiers lay on the field, while Athens and Plataea lost around 192 warriors. The figure recorded by Herodotus, and though far smaller than the enemy's losses, each of those 192 was a part of the city-state itself, a citizen with a voice in the assembly, a vote in the young democracy. Marathon was no easy triumph, but the price Athens chose to pay to keep its freedom. The bodies left on the sands of Marathon marked more than a military victory. They marked the beginning of a profound geopolitical shift. The supposedly invincible Persian Empire had revealed a fracture. For the first time, an army neither large nor wealthy had defeated a power that had conquered Babylon and Egypt. News of the victory spread across Greece like wind sweeping through the valleys of Attica. A city-state could stand firm against an empire. Plataea, the lone ally, etched its name into history by joining Athens to achieve the impossible. That spirit traveled to other polis, places long torn between submission and resistance. Marathon became proof that freedom was not a dream. but something secured through discipline, courage, and unity in the face of the vast shadow rising from the east. Persia withdrew, but it did not give up. Darius returned to Persia to prepare a larger, broader, more decisive campaign. But his death left the plan unfinished. His successor, Xerxes I, returned to Greece 30 years later with a massive army and fleet, leading to Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea, a chain of battles like waves following the first gust of wind at Marathon. Had Marathon been lost, Athens would likely have become a Persian province, and Thermopylae would never have happened, for there would have been no Greece left to defend. Marathon did not end the Greco-Persian Wars. It opened them, laying the first stone on the road that would carry Greece through decades of resisting empire. After the victory, Athens did not simply celebrate. They built a communal tomb for the 192 fallen hoplites, the Polyandrium, so their names would not vanish into the sand, and so the victory would not be claimed by a king but honored by its citizens. No pyramid, no palace, only a great earthen mound where warriors and the city they protected rested together. That idea, that victory belonged to the collective rather than a ruler, became a cornerstone of Greek identity. Marathon did not raise statues of emperors. It raised faith in human beings. The implications of the battle stretched far beyond geography. Had Persia won, the Mediterranean might have become the domain of an Eastern superpower, and the idea of democracy might never have developed into a political system that would shape millennia. But Marathon held, meaning Greece endured. And if Greece endured, then philosophy, science, art, civic debate, what the world now calls the foundations of Western civilization, found ground to grow. Aristotle, Plato, Pericles, Westphal, names of the Golden Age arose in a world Marathon had protected. That battle did not merely save Athens, it indirectly safeguarded the future of human thought itself. Persia retreated but did not vanish from history. They returned with even greater fleets and forces, with sharper resolve. The confrontations after Marathon were fiercer still, and the victory at Marathon became the measure by which the Greeks judged themselves. They learned that unity creates strength, that clever strategy can overcome numbers, that freedom, when defended at the right moment, can ignite centuries of brilliance. Marathon was not simply a battle, it was the bend in history's arc. If Athens had fallen that day, would Pericles have ever built the Parthenon? Would Socrates have stood in the agora questioning the nature of virtue and justice? Would democracy have survived, or would it have been ground into dust beneath the hooves of conquest? If Marathon had fallen, Western history might not resemble anything we know today. More than 2,000 years have passed, yet the sands of Marathon remain, and the Aegean still breaks against the shore as it did long ago. That strip of land once witnessed the moment a people chose not to bow, and that moment still echoes through every page of history. For Marathon is not merely a battle, it is humanity's choice between two paths, submission or self-determination, silence or resistance. If those 10,000 hoplites had not stood their ground, if they had let their shields drop just one more step, if Athens had sunk beneath Persia's shadow, would democracy ever have been born? Would the ideas that shaped the world ever have been spoken aloud? If Marathon had fallen, the world we live in today might have worn a very different face. Marathon closed not with a shout, but with a quiet aftershock that has rippled for more than 2,000 years, like smoke from a forge of human will still smoldering across the Attican plain. That victory did not belong only to those who fell, but to every generation that has spoken their names, understood why they stood, and why they did not retreat. A small army preserved its freedom. A small city-state altered the course of history. And from that moment on, the world was no longer the same. Today we see Marathon only in books and statues, yet every retelling still carries the rhythm of hoplite footsteps on sand, the heavy breath of those who defended something larger than themselves, the future. If you feel that history is not just numbers, but the lifeblood of humanity running across the ages, join us in the episodes to come. Every battle is a cross-section. Every era is a question without a final answer. Marathon was only the opening stroke in a long series of collisions between East and West, empire and freedom, discipline and belief. Hit subscribe so that when the next chapter of history unfolds, you won't be watching from the sidelines, but standing once again in the eye of the storm, where even the smallest choices can turn the wheel of civilization.